out there, and I'm always glad to be here myself. I have my regular panel school committee show. We're going to talk about, like we usually do, some of the things that go on in the school department, the school district, however you want to say it. We usually have Gabe Andrade, but he has something to do this evening, so he's not here with us, but we have, or I have, I should say, Joe Martins. Welcome back, Joe. Always nice to have you here.
Thank you.
And Edward Costar.
Yep, Costar.
Costar.
It's just like Costa with a silent R.
I see. All right. So it's Costa with a silent R.
Yes.
All right. That's kind of an unusual name,
Yes.
in a sense that I've never heard of it before.
My father had it, I had it. Where it came down from before then, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah. All right, with an R on the end. So, gentlemen, the Herald News reported that still looking for a number of school teachers. Mr. Costa, how many do you estimate that are still needed in the school department?
Well, I was looking just before the show at the last agenda. We had a list of resignations, and I counted about 62, 63 resignations, but not all of those were teachers. Probably about a third of them were teachers. And principals, we have, the superintendent has hired a number of principals who are now in the process of searching for and trying to fill those teacher slots.
All right, so the way the system works is that the principal is the one who hires the teachers. Is that correct?
Yeah, the principal hires a teacher with the approval of the superintendent.
All right, but not the school committee.
Not the school committee, no.
Those days are long gone. At one time,
Supposedly to take the politics out of hiring?
Well, it was supposed to take the nepotism
Oh, well,
out.
that's not political at
Yeah,
all.
oh, I know, but
Well, what happens if, do you get to know who the people are that get hired? So this is the principal hires 4 school teachers. Are those names or resumes given to you?
no.
So
We do not get the resumes of the teachers.
what we would get, I would think, would be the names on the agenda of who's
Oh,
hired. Right.
you're told
Yeah,
who
who's
was
hired, what
hired.
school.
not the resume?
Not the resumes. We do not see the resumes of the principals either. We're told who that's the legal prerogative of the superintendent and the principals.
There was once a time, and I have not been on the school committee as long as my colleague here, but I worked in the Fall River school system for over 30 years, and I've been on the other side of that. And when there was a time when the names would be reported to the school committee with maybe a brief synopsis. You know, Mary so-and-so, 3rd grade teacher, worked in Brockton for X number of years, and I don't know if you still get
Well,
that.
we do. We receive a listing of on the agenda when
Yeah.
it comes out. It's listed who's hired,
Yeah.
right, and what step they're hired on, and whether or not they're licensed, or if they're on waiver, meaning they haven't completed all the steps for licensing, but the Department of Ed has allowed them a waiver, which is 1 year. And so we're told that, but it's after the fact, not before the fact.
Right.
So no real background of the hire is available insofar as your scrutiny, the school committee.
No, that's
Prerogative.
responsibility of the superintendent, and if we find that hey, wait a minute, you're hiring people who are not capable of doing the job, then we're going to be looking at you. And the hiring and the firing of the superintendent is a legal responsibility of the school committee, along with the business manager or chief financial officer, school nurses. But on the school nurses, the superintendent recommends, and we can say yes or no.
Now, let's say that a person is hired and one or two of the members on the school committee get a phone call from someone and says, wow, how did you get to hire that person? Or that person has this type of background. Or back in Texas, what do you do next? What do you do? Do you take that forward somehow and try to evaluate or investigate this very negative information?
Well, if I may, I would refer that back to the superintendent and ask the superintendent to investigate that and get back to us, and I would expect that the superintendent would do that. You know, I just want to say one thing about the process. You know, I worked in the school system when it was that the school committee approved every hire, every teacher.
So that came before you.
Right. But I was in the system when that happened. Well, when I got my first job, I was recommended by a school committee that voted on me. But if a teacher was recommended by the school committee, that teacher could show up at school X, the principal having had no input on that teacher whatsoever.
Principal would have to take that teacher in.
That's right. Yep. For better or for worse. So now, I think it's fair to say that when a principal is appointed, and now they are interviewing candidates, and certainly the superintendent has the final prerogative over that, principals are highly motivated to get the best teachers because they know that their evaluation, their school, their performance is going to be evaluated based upon the quality of the teaching that goes on in that school. So to that extent, I think it takes the politics out of it. Those principals want to make sure that they get the best person. Now, sometimes they hit, sometimes they don't. But I don't know if you'd agree with me, Joe.
Oh, I do. I do agree with that because, and that then goes upstream with the superintendent.
Yes.
The superintendent hires the principals and should be looking for the best possible principal for that school, for the opening. And failure to have, if that principal as a new hire then falls flat on his or her face, that's going to be a reflection on the superintendent because of the fact that when I look at the MCAS scores, now this is, by the way, this is the last year of the MCAS, 2017.
That's it.
16, 17, and by June of 2017, schools are supposed to have reached certain goals, right, in there. And I look at that and say, hey, during the course of the year when you're looking at, when I look at the data.
So let me just interrupt. So MCAS was a temporary measure?
No, it had an ending point, which was June of 2017 in there. It started back, 2008, something around there.
8-9 years, yeah.
So 2017 is the ending point, and each school, every school had a goal in order to achieve. One of those is to take your what is referred to as achievement cap, and from 100%. Let me back up. Back when we were under this No Child Left Behind issue, and every child was supposed to be 100% proficient at all of the English, language arts, math, science, and social studies. Right? It was quickly realized that, whoa, every child, that's a extremely lofty goal, impossible to achieve for every child. Right? So it was changed. It was, okay, we will take 100% and using 2011 as a baseline, wherever your school was as a school for English language arts, math, science, and social studies, whichever you were at 2011, that is the baseline. So now between this baseline and 2017 is referred to as a gap. Right? So
not every school is going to achieve the same.
That's correct.
Amount.
Not every school is going to achieve the same amount or the same level of proficiency. It's now school A has this much of a gap, school B has this much of a gap, but in any case, by 2017, this gap was supposed to be cut in half.
So with the elimination of MCAS in 2017, then what will be the measure of proficiency of a school or a school district?
Well, let me say this. Lest people start celebrating that MCAS is going to be eliminated by 2017, that does not mean that high-stakes testing is going to disappear as of 2017. It just simply means that MCAS in its present form probably won't exist, but it's going to be reincarnated in a different way. They call it MCAS 2.0,
Right.
where they're going to be changing the test. So they're tweaking the test in certain ways, and then there was a whole issue of whether or not we should have MCAS at all, or should we adopt PARC, which is a measure of the Common Core curriculum. So there are a whole of other issues, but high-stakes testing will be existing after 2017, but as Joe rightly points out, the closing of the gap based on the current test will be measured as of 2017.
Now, the Fall River School District, in comparison to other districts in the Commonwealth, how does it fit? What is its position, relatively speaking?
When you're saying comparison to other schools, I don't really care about other school systems. I care about one school system, and that's Fall River in there. And I compare to what the regulations require. That is that gap cut in half by 2017.
And will it
now,
be,
if you
will
ask
it,
me,
will it
are
be
we
cut?
going to make it? The answer is no. And I've said this before.
Okay.
We're not going to make it.
Okay, and not making it, what will it achieve? Will it be? It's not going to be cut in half. Will it? Will it be? 20% or 30%?
Yeah, whatever the score is, some schools will. Some schools will indeed achieve cutting all of their gaps in half for English language arts, math, and science.
And some will go
social
above,
studies.
maybe?
Some might very well go above that, and some won't. But unfortunately, as a district, because the district has a gap which encompasses all of the students, and are we going to make that? No, we are not going to make it. That's been a concern of mine, because of the fact that every year when we go through the budget and we look at the scores of the schools, each individual school, MCAS scores, and I have been plotting every single school and the district since 2008. Right? And I have a graph of all of them in there. Now, I know some schools are going to achieve the goal, others are going to surpass the goal, and others are not going to surpass the goal, are not going to reach it. However, as a district, unfortunately, we will not achieve that goal. What is the consequence? Nobody knows what the consequences are. Withhold funds, that's ludicrous. Because what are you going to do? Your school needs help and you're going to remove funds from that?
Punish them?
Yeah, absolutely so. That's ridiculous.
Especially the schools that you would be punishing would be the schools that need the most help.
Right.
And urban districts are the schools very often that need the most help. And the whole issue of data has become, I guess the term that comes to mind is obfuscated by the way in which the state reports the data. What we look at in Fall River, and sometimes what we celebrate, as it should be, is improvement. And the state talks about our improvement scores, that we've improved, so that if we've started out as a school that's a very low-scoring school, but 3 years later we've improved remarkably, we celebrate that improvement, and rightfully so. And that's one bit of data. So you hear people talking about level 1 schools, and 2 years ago we had 5 level 1 schools. A level 1 school is a school that at one time was relatively low scoring but had significant improvement, and it became a level 1 school. But there's another piece of data which basically compares your school with all of the schools in the state, not just the urban schools, not just the schools that have improved, not just your improvement rate. It's what we call the percentile rate. when I used to work for the school system, one of my responsibilities used to be, as Joe talks about, charting MCAS. Before MCAS,
What did you do in the school system?
I started out as a school psychologist, then I was director of guidance. I was coordinator of student services for 25 years. I wrote policies. I dealt with student crises that came up. I supervised counseling services. My last 2 years, I was assistant to Superintendent Dr. Fisher. But one of my responsibilities, ancillary student services, was my job title, and ancillary always bothered me because it meant if nobody knew where it fit, it always seemed to fall down to me. And one of the things that I was responsible for was looking at and charting our SAT scores. That was the only data that we had, and I had charted that for 20 years, just probably the way Joe does for each school. And when we compared our SAT scores, the only comparison that meant anything was our comparison with the state SAT scores. How did Durfee High School compare in comparison to the state SAT scores? And I charted it. And the state always scored higher than Durfee. Some good years, we went up enough and the state came down enough that we closed that gap. Well, if you look at MCAS scores, we also have data that isn't often reported on, which compares every school not only in terms of how much it's improved, but how does it compare with all of the schools? Some people argue it's unfair to compare us, in some ways it is, with Newton, Wellesley, Weston, and those schools. However, our level 1 schools, the highest scoring level 1 school in this district right now is in the 67th percentile, which means that it's better than 2/3 of the schools in the state.
Wow.
Which is pretty good.
Yeah.
But we also have level 1 schools that are in the 40th percentile.
Which is not so
Or the
good.
37th percentile. And we have a school that's, to show you how convoluted it is, that dropped down from level 1 to level 2, even though it went up from the 50th percentile, which is right in the middle, to the 52nd percentile. And then to make it even more confusing, if you go across the river to Somerset, their level 2 scores are all in the 60th percentile. So it's confusing to look at it, but I tend to prefer to look at how do we compare when we compare it to the state. And when I first ran for office, those scores were very low. I have to say that last year, our percentile rates went up in almost all of our schools, which showed me improvement. But still, in answering a question that you asked at the very beginning, where do we stand? In terms of percentile rate, we are in the lowest 15% of the state. That includes the entire state. And that's not a place where you want to be. You want
15%.
Yes.
Out of 100%.
That means that 85% of the schools, districts statewide are higher than Fall River.
All right. New superintendent. How long has he been on the job, Joe?
Whoosh, since July 1st.
July 1st, and we're still in July.
That's right.
Yep.
Today is what, the 27th?
Yep.
So he's got about 27 days on the job. How's he doing?
I think he's doing fairly well in here. I like how he, every week so far, we receive a brief synopsis of what has happened during that week.
Now, when you say we, you mean
School committee.
individual school committee people?
Correct.
Everybody on the school committee.
Yeah, gets a briefing or this brief.
Correct. In there. So I like that. And he seems to be very open to suggestions from school committee members. I've submitted a few to him, and we'll see what he does.
Is this something new? As far as being told each and every week, given this type of information on a weekly basis?
Basically, it was in the previous superintendent used to do it on a monthly basis, but this is, he's been doing it on a weekly basis, which, if something happened a month prior, okay, fine, what are you going to do about it now? Whereas if it happened only a few days ago, hey, here's something, it's still fresh. What has been done about it?
And the school committee meets every 2 weeks?
No, once a month.
Once a
Except for we have subcommittee meetings, so it ends up just about 2 meetings a month, but one regular meeting
And one
one subcommittee meeting.
So the information that you receive on a weekly basis gives you great preparation for the regular meeting.
Correct.
But you do have an agenda.
Yes.
But however, you do get a lot of this information, so it could fit into items on the agenda. So that seems to be a greater ability of each school committee person to really know what's going on when the regular meeting takes place.
Yes.
Yeah, I would just say too that even more to add to what Joe was saying, what I like especially is he hit the ground running. The first day he was on the job, he was out visiting schools, even though it was the summer. He had open house where teachers, administrators, anybody could come and speak to him. He went out and listened to people. He talked to people. The school system, when he arrived, I would think it's fair to say that the cupboard was kind of bare. Many teachers and people had left during the budget process. They were afraid. They went to other jobs. They didn't know what was going to happen. And one of the first things he did was to reassure people that he was here, that if you left, he wanted you to come back. And he's been working very hard to fill principalships and to try to fill some of those positions. I had the chance the other day. He's very open to school committee people. If you want to meet with him and give him a call, he's more than willing to do that. I had an opportunity to meet with him just a couple of days ago for the first time since he's been on the job. I had certainly spoken to him a lot. I was on the search committee, so I had seen
maybe
him
we can
frequently.
bring him on a show, Joe.
I'm sure he would be glad to do
I'm sure
it.
he will.
When I went to see him on Tuesday, he took me into a little office that ironically, I didn't tell him this, used to be the office, the last office I had before I retired. And
You took all the bugs out, right?
it was like a war room. I mean, it was like being in a military, like I saw the movie Patton, when Patton was inside this trailer, and they had, all kinds of war plans on every wall. Well, it wasn't war, but in this room he had a table, and he had large whiteboards on every side in which he had written notes that he had gotten from teachers and administrators and school committee people, ideas that people had or things that came to mind that he wanted to come back to and return to, goals, objectives. He's going to meet with the school committee to try to talk to us about what our goals and the objectives are going to be. So it was obviously somebody that's put in a lot of work and a lot of thought and listening to a lot of people. While I was talking to him, sometimes he would kind of get up and he'd write something on the board, adding a thought that he had as a result of that he wanted to get back to. So obviously, we've got somebody that encourages people, is a hard worker, wants to solicit ideas, and we all on the school committee, I'm pretty sure, want to work with him.
What's his background?
What's his background?
Yeah.
He has a doctoral degree, and I think he's an EDD.
He has educational administration. He has a Ph.D. from Boston
PhD.
College.
Okay.
In educational leadership.
So what's his bachelor's?
He was.
What's his bachelor's degree? How did he start off?
I know that. I don't know what his bachelor's degree is.
Well, I should know it because I interviewed him like twice, but I interviewed like 10 different people.
Sometimes people have, diverse backgrounds. They don't start in education.
Like
This
my
guy-
bachelor's degree is industrial engineering.
Well, here's what I remember. What I remember was he was a product of a vocational school. He was a vocational student himself.
Oh, what shop?
I don't know.
Drafting shop.
Wow, that's a
Yeah.
good shop.
And then I'm glad that you would remember that,
Yeah,
Joe.
that one I remember.
And then he went on, he became a teacher, he was a superintendent in Brockton for many years.
What vocational school? In Massachusetts?
Yes, in Massachusetts. Yes.
Not a Diamond graduate.
No, I think it was the Boston area.
Yeah, it was in the Boston area, but I don't know. I don't know which one.
So he certainly came up through the ranks.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And he became
yeah.
Secretary of Education in the state of Massachusetts.
Oh, he was the Secretary
For 2
of
years.
Education.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that was...
Under
Deval Patrick.
Deval Patrick.
Right.
Yeah.
that you got a good,
Right.
good
So
view of...
there was a myth
the
that
whole-
we were led to believe that when the past superintendent left to go to Barnstable, that we would not be able to attract any candidates. We had 19 applicants. Our 3 finalists...
What was the basis of that?
Well, because we were told by the Massachusetts Association of School Committee, and it was very common, that the pool of people applying for superintendencies was a shallow pool. But that did not turn out to be the case in Fall River. So we attracted, among
19?
others,
19?
the Secretary of Education in the state of Massachusetts, who is now our superintendent, and all 3 of our candidates had PhDs, 2 from Boston College, 1 from Harvard. and we had a very good pool. We had to narrow it down from 19 to 10. We conducted a very vast committee of 14 people.
Now, you were on a committee?
Yeah, there were 14 people that interviewed these 10 individuals, 2-hour interviews each over 5 nights, and then
So there's
3
14
finalists.
people in a room
That's
and
right.
one person?
We
and-
put together questions that were like, there were like 20 questions that 14 people put together, each in different areas, which is what the school committee then did, only the questions were different. And then we recommended 3 finalists before the school committee, then the
Yeah,
school
the 3
committee.
finalists were recommended, and then the full school committee interviewed the 3 finalists.
Now, how long is this
individually.
contract?
4 years.
A 4-year contract?
Correct.
Is that common?
Yeah, it's pretty common. The minimum is 3. Nobody gets, you could go to, legally could go to 5, but nobody does that.
4 is fairly...
So 4, yeah.
Now-
But his contract is public record at this point in
Right.
time.
Yeah.
So there are provisions in there that, you know, if, look, you might think, well, what happens if he doesn't do a good job? There is provisions for termination for cause in there, and there's also a provision for just plain termination without cause.
Without
in there.
cause. And
Without
what would
cause.
what would that be? Without
I'm
cause?
sorry?
What kind of a
3 months.
termination? What's that?
3 months salary
Without cause?
without cause, yeah. In there, so.
I mean,
yeah.
without cause would be if there's some kind of irreconcilable differences between a
Right.
superintendent and a school committee. But, you know, I'm feeling very optimistic, right? At this point in time, I'm feeling very optimistic. I'm seeing this going in the right direction. I'm seeing a superintendent that's going to be responsive to the school committee.
Yes.
And someone who is out there working really hard, day to day, listening, talking, trying to, like I said, he inherited a situation where a lot of our staff were feeling very anxious. Many people had left. He had to fill the schools, and he's doing a fine job in
Okay,
the month he's
I've
been
got
here.
one final question. We're getting down to the end. If a majority of the school committee decided to terminate his contract without cause, legally they could.
Yes, that could happen.
All right.
But I don't think that will. He's
Well,
exhibited a very positive
We're down to the end of the
demonstration.
program. It goes by fast. Joe, any predictions, quickly?
I think we're going to have a very good school year.
Ed?
I would echo that.
Okay. Glad to have you out there watching the program. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll present them to the school committee people when they come on my program. All right, you can call them directly. I'm sure they'd be more than willing to answer what you have on your mind. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.